the B-17 flying bomber, probably one of the most beautiful and legendary bombers of the Second World War. But although its mighty status, it was also seen as the most dangerous job to do during the Second World War. But why? Well, today we're going to take a deep look into the history of the B-17 and also look at the dark pages and discover why this plane was almost as lethal for the crew as for the enemies they were chasing. So sit back and relax, because we're going to take a deep dive into World War II history. Let's go! So the B-17, the making of this majestic plane already started way back before the Second World War even began, in 1934 to be exactly. At the time, the US Army aircraft set out their new expectations for a 4-motored bomber who could fly 10 hours straight with a bomb load with them and have a max range of 3,200 kilometers and a max speed of 400 kilometers per hour. So now the expectations were set. There were 3 airplane manufacturers who tried to take the job. First one being Douglas, second one being Martin, and the third and final one being Boeing. And Boeing was the one who actually got the job. And not so long after, in 1935, the Model 299 would go on his first test flight. Already equipped with a bomb load of 2,200 kilos and 5 machine guns, it already set the tone of what the B-17 would become one day. But we all know it was near what the B-17 would be at the end of the war. And in 1939 it would enter official production under the name of the B-17A, and they would try to deliver 40 of them before 1940. But in 1941 there were actually 170 B-17s operational in America, divided over 2 bomber groups, one on the East Coast and one on the West Coast. So constantly I have been talking about also variants of the B-17. I have been talking about the A version and the B version. In total there were 7 variants, so let's take a look at them. Let's go! So the B-17 had different variants. But what were they? Well, they were initially just upgrades from the original variant. So the first variant made was the B-17A. The B-17A was basically just the first operational B-17 that was created in 1939 and just had everything that the basic B-17 had in the beginning. In total, there will be 7 different variants made, so you can really see that the B-17 went through a path and improved along the way till its legendary status that it had until the end of the war. So it wasn't that it was like a perfect design, that the B-17 was created and it was the perfect bomber. No, it wasn't. It was a good airplane in the beginning and it just became better and better. It was a very beautiful and very good plane, especially if you like compared it to the B-17A and the last version made of it. It is an enormous difference. But besides all that, the B-17B. B-17B was initially the first improvement of the original design. It featured things like hydraulic brakes, a crew repositioning, improved rudders, improved tails, all that kind of thing. So as you see, already a lot of upgrades. The third one would be the B-17C. This airplane already concluded a lot of other upgrades, like improved firing positions. It had different guns, it included more armor for the persons inside of the airplane, and it had self-closing fuelage tanks. So as you see, again, a massive upgrade, because this is only the third design. Remember, there were 7 in total. So we started with the B-17A and now we're already at the B-17C. The next one, with again a very original name, yeah, you've probably guessed it already, the B-17D. As you see, America was very original in coming up with these names. Good job, man, good job, good job, good job. But no, besides that, the B-17D included a lot of big upgrades actually. It had things like an improved tail, not an improved tail, what am I saying? An improved cockpit and a redesign a little bit of the nose. The crew went from 9 to 10 and it also had some internal improvements. So we're now already at the B-17D, and from this point of time it really gets interesting. So first, before we go further into the B-17s, let me give you a quick look at what the different designs look like, which I just showed you. So let's go. We're back from the first 4 designs. Now the last 3. The first of the 3 was the B-17E. The B-17E included things like an improved fuselage and large rudders, and it also now included a new machine gun, well, a new place for a machine gun in the tail. In the tail there would be an extra turret, and the other turrets would be modified. Then you had the B-17F. The B-17F included something that most of you probably won't expect from a aircrew. So the B-17F included a 1 plurplex nose, and this was kind of a thing, a material, kind of hard plastic you can make out of it. Interesting story about these. So the US 8th Air Force, that were the Air Force group that were attacking Germany from England, so flying from England to Germany, bombing the hell out of them and getting back to England. Them. Well, they saw that due to this new nose, their airplanes were very vital from frontal attacks. So what did they do? Well, they included new things and made especially field modifications. They included machine guns in the front of it. So light or heavy machine guns, and they would place them at the ball point of the front nose. So now they had either a machine gun in the nose or at the side, just to protect them more from frontal attacks. And then at the end we had the B-17G. The B-17G was the last variant made and was kind of the, well, maybe not the perfect version, because there is always more and more things to improve, but this was kind of the best version the B-17 ever had, with a road removed. Okay, that was kind of a technical difficulty. So what was I saying? So the B-17G included a ball, well, included a new kind of defense, because it included a, how it's called again, a remote controlled machine gun ball at the front of the plane. So under the chin of the plane, it included a remote control ball, which solved the defense problem that the vulnerability was very big in front of the airplane. Whew. That were a lot, but especially a lot upgrades in those 6 years, because remember, the airplane was used from 1939 to 1955, I think, if I'm correct. So the B-17 was used for a long time, but it saw its major use in the Second World War. So most of these upgrades were made during those 6 years. It improved from a basic bomber to one of the most feared bombers of the Second World War. So as you see, it's a fantastic plane, but there is a cow in the room that we have to talk about. We already talked about that it was very dangerous for the crew itself, the job of being a B-17 crewman. But why? And those, again, a technical difficulty there. For some reason my phone decided to stop filming, so sorry for that. So what I was saying, you had this dark side at the B-17 bomber, but what is it? And what made this plane so dangerous? Well, to understand what made it so dangerous, being the job of a B-17 crew member, we gotta know where it was used and how it was used. So that will be the next part, the use in Europe. Let's go. Okay, the use. So for now, we're going to just look into the Europe side, because otherwise you TikTok kids are going to click right away, because this video will get way too long. But believe me, just stay here, it will get more and more interesting. And I also have a lot of other interesting videos on my YouTube channel, so be sure to check that out. But besides that, further into the history, of course. So it's 1939, the B-17 was created, blah blah blah. And in 1941, there would already be 170 B-17's operational. There were the two versions, of course, the A version and the B version. They were split in two groups, one on the west coast, one on the east coast, responsible for defending America. But in 1941, beginning of 1941, the British were in desperate need of good bombers. So 20 B-17's were delivered under the name of Fortress 1 to the RAF. So the B-17 saw its first use in like early 1941. But at the end of 1941, the Americans would also be pulled into the action, and they would be discovering the Germany itself by its own airplanes. So they dispatched a very big group, the 8th Army Air Force in England, and they were performing missions from 1941 from England to Germany, including of course the B-17 bombers. And not much later, in the February of 1943, there would also be the 15th Army Air Force that would include bombers that were from Italy. So you now have basically two places where bombers are going to give hell to the people that are on the earth. One in England and one in Italy. But what did they do, of course, because now we have been constantly talking about where they were, how much they were, but we haven't talked about what they did. Well, in official terms, they did precise bombings. They did campaigns on German industrial zones and did precise bombings. It wasn't really precise bombings because mostly they just did carpet bombing. And to explain carpet bombing in simple terms, it's more like, okay, we have a big stretch of land and here we have the factory. Instead of trying to bomb the factory precisely, we will just bomb the whole land and we won't miss anything because we just hit everything. That kind of logic. So instead of bombing precise, like the name itself says, it was just, okay, here we have a stuck land, bomb the shit out of it. That's kind of simply explained. It's much more complicated than that, but simply explained, that is what carpet bombing is. So they started doing that and started bombing the shit out of German industrial zones, and this made Germany start losing the war because you're nothing without your factories. That's why Russia had an advantage. What did they do when the Germans were going as fast as they can? It was kind of a rally to Moscow in 1941. They were constantly moving their factories further and further, because once you don't have your factories anymore, you can't do anything. You rely on your factories to make ammunition, rifles, airplanes, bomber, without your factories, you're nothing. Just nothing. So bombing their factories, making them unusable, were a very, very big blow to the Germans. But these B-17's weren't the flying modern airplanes that we have now. No, they were manned by men. 10 to be exactly, of course. But what did they do? Because how can you be with 10 in such an airplane doing a single job? So we're going to look at the 10 different jobs they did. So sit back and relax, because this is going to take a while. The crew. The flight commander holding the highest pilot rank was entrusted with the aircraft and was just the crew's commander, typically assumed to control the aircraft only during the critical phase of the mission and did the direct approach on the target for bomb deployment. The second one was the co-pilot, serving as a second in command, skillfully navigated the aircraft to and from the target, ensuring a safe return journey for the crew. The bomber and front gunner. This man had a double function and acted as a front gunner along the way, whose task was to cover the sector on the 100 degrees horizon in front of the aircraft. But he came into action as a bomb aimer when approaching the target and dropped the bombs. 4. The flight engineer and rear gunner, who also had a dual function. He was responsible for the proper functioning of the engines during the flight, and in case of approaching danger, he operated the turret on the back of the aircraft, with which he covered the sector of 360 degrees above the aircraft. 5. The navigator radio operator held a pivotal role aboard the aircraft, serving as the linchpin for mission success. Tasked with maintaining precise course navigation, they also played a crucial role in managing radio communications with other aircraft in the formation and potentially with the home base. 6. And 7. The starboard and port gunners, stationed on the opposite sides of the aircraft, were tasked with covering their respective 180-degree sectors, ensuring comprehensive defensive coverage for the aircraft. 7. The belly gunner, positioned in the turret beneath the aircraft, he had the critical responsibility of providing defense coverage for the entire 300-degree sector beneath the aircrafting, safeguarding against threats from all angles. This is also the job that was often seen as one of the most dangerous jobs to do during the Second World War, because as you see, the belly gunner sits beneath the aircraft, so any crash landing or any landing that would go wrong, he will be the one crushed to death, unfortunately. 9. The tail gunner, stationed at the rear of the aircraft, he was tasked with vigilantly moderating and protecting the 180-degree sector behind the aircraft, ensuring defense against threats from the rear. But when operations intensified, the crew size expanded to 10 members, because it became more evident during combat scenarios that the flight engineer was often occupied with engine maintenance, leaving insufficient time to operate the turret above the fuselage. Consequently, crews were provided with a dedicated rear gunner to enhance defensive capabilities. We haven't got to the part that we have been constantly talking about, the dark side of the B-17 bomber. So, if you have listened very closely to what I have been saying, this airplane sounds like, as its nickname says, a flying fortress. It had 13 machine guns, it could carry a ton load of bombs, and it had improved armor, improved fuselage, just everything sounds so good. What made this plane so deadly then that the crew itself was getting hurt so much? Well, we're now getting into that. This is the last part of this video, so enjoy it, because we're going to take a dive again, but this time in the dark side of the B-17. So as I said, this thing had a dark side. Throughout this video I have mentioned that a lot, but if I would be somebody who didn't know anything about World War II, and I was listening to this video, the B-17 would look like the perfect bomber. It had a big crew, it had a lot of machine guns, it had a big payload of bombs that he could drop. It had such good upgrades made along the way to be perfect against German attacks. Why has it a dark page, and why is it famous for being one of the most dangerous jobs to do during the Second World War? Well, it has all to do with one basic thing. It's opticals. So the optical vision you had to drop your bombs, well, it was kind of cursed by design, because due to this thing, when dropping bombs, you needed to do it in broad daylight. You couldn't do night raids. No, you needed to do it in broad daylight, otherwise you couldn't see where you dropped your bombs. This made the job for many things such more easily. Like German flak crews could easily spot them. German airplanes could easily spot them without needing any light to see them flying, because believe me, a B-17 is freaking huge. If you're walking around and there is a formation of 122 bombers flying next to you or flying above you, you will see it. So there were 3 different occasions where the B-17 bomber really showed how vulnerable it was, and we're going to look into them separately. So let's go. The first one takes place in 1943 in the Fouke factories in Bremen. Let's go. So the first time the B-17 showed it was really vulnerable was when the mission came to drop bombs on the Fouke Wolf airplane manufacturer. So famous of course for making the most beautiful German airplanes ever seen, they were about to drop bombs on them. So a formation of 122 B-17s went out to attack those factories. And you would imagine that 122 B-17s unloading their complete payload on them would mean that they would be completely devastated and everything. Well, no, because it actually turned out worse for the B-17s. Because when they returned, 16 airplanes were lost and more than 40 were seen heavily damaged, 48 to be precise. This meant that more than half of the airplanes was not operational after the mission. So you had a casualty rate that was insanely high because more than half of the things of the airplanes that was with you on the mission were not operational anymore. But this is a small attack or a small blow for the Americans because believe me, the missions were only about to get worse and worse because now they were trying to attack the Kogellager industry close to Schneidfurt. And believe me, things are about to get really nasty. So let's go. The second time the B-17 showed how vulnerable it was when in the August of 1943 the 8th Air Division attacked the Kogellager industry close to Schweinfurt. A formation of 230 B-17s flew out to destroy the Kogellager industry, and you would think such a big group of B-17s loaded with bombs would be able to destroy a big part or maybe even the whole Kogellager industry. Well, no, they did almost no damage. The only damage that was done is to themselves because when they returned, they lost 36 B-17s and more than 200 crew members. How? Well, German fighters responded to the attack and were able to fight off the B-17s as much as possible. Hereby, the B-17s did almost no damage. So now it's already getting worse and worse. There are a lot of crew members getting lost, but also a lot of airplanes getting lost. But the worst was yet to come. So let's go to the third and last time the B-17 showed how vulnerable it was. The third time the B-17 showed us how vulnerable it was actually on the second attack of the Kogellager industry. On the 14th of October 1943, at that time just a normal Thursday, would soon be called Black Thursday. Because of the 291 B-17s headed out that day, only 33 would return unscathed. 59 were lost over enemy territory. 1 needed to make an emergency landing in the British Channel, and 5 had to make a similar landing on the British mainland. Also, 12 B-17s were so damaged upon landing that they were deemed irreparable and had to be scrapped. Not to mention the 122 B-17s that were so damaged that they needed substantial repairs just to make them operational again. But besides all the material loss, 650 of the 2,900 men headed out on the mission that day didn't return back home. How did that happen? How did a formation of 291 B-17s get so destroyed like that? Well, above their target zone, they met a group of 300 German fighters that just went nuts on them and almost destroyed their whole Air Force. Well, Air Force, their whole bomb group. What did they learn after that? That a B-17, although the much of air defense that it had 30 machine guns. Although all of that, it needed to have an escort because those fighter planes could fly through them and attack them from each side. With the machine guns, you were always limited on how much you can turn and see actually. So at that time, they decided to send the 2 legendary fighters of the American Army with them, the P-51 and the P-47. Now you may ask yourself, why didn't they do that sooner? Well, they had the problem that they are doing missions that are very, very far. Like you're flying from Britain to Germany, back to Britain. That's a very long thing you have to do. So what did they do? They make droppable tanks that they could fix at the wings, and once they were empty, they could drop them, and they had enough fuselage to go back and forward from Germany to England. So, did the legendary status of the B-17 deserve, well, did the B-17 deserve this legendary status? At one side it did, and one side it didn't. Of the more than 12,000 that were built, 4,635 would be lost in combat. That's 1/3. Well, that's more than 1/3. So, of 3 B-17s, one would be destroyed after the war, like from every B-17 ever made. So, that's crazy to realize. And more B-17s also crashed during just general accidents, but they don't count because it wasn't in combat. How did it gain its legendary status then? Well, mostly because of stories, and although losing so much planes, the stories are incomparable because you have stories about B-17s with 2 motors left or 1 motor even left, flying back to England, making it back safe. B-17s were with loads and loads of holes due to wings and through their body, just being able to fly back safe to England. And due to the massive amount of guns on that plane, it gained the legendary status of a flying fortress, because it was. It did until 1943. They flew alone. Like, you gotta imagine just bombers, not with an escort, just nothing, just bombers flying alone, being normally an easy prey, but no, they fought mostly enemy planes off. The Americans, 8th Army US Air Division, claimed they had destroyed 200 German planes in combat with just B-17s, which is crazy, although the number is mostly turned out because Germans say there were only 20, but above all that, they still managed to do it. So, did the B-17 get his nickname deserved? At one side it's yes, and one side no, because we can't forget the dark side behind the B-17 and behind the man that flew these majestic planes, because you gotta imagine 4,365 lost, and each B-17 had a crew of 10. So just start counting how many men were probably lost during that time. That was a very long but a very informational video. I hope you enjoyed this video one way or another, and I hope you learned a thing or two about this mighty beast, the B-17. If you want to see more of this World War II content, I also do reenactments, and I went on a reenactment event not long ago in Bordeaux, so be sure to go check out that. But for now, World War II Guy 1 out.